For decades, eggs were put on trial in the court of public health, accused of clogging arteries, raising cholesterol, and quietly shortening lives, especially in older adults. But the truth is far more unsettling than the headlines ever admitted, because eggs were never the real danger. The danger was how modern life taught us to eat them. And for seniors, that mistake can mean the difference between strength and frailty, clarity and cognitive decline, resilience and silent inflammation building day after day. As we age, the body changes in ways most people never feel until damage is already done. Stomach acid production drops, bile flow slows, insulin sensitivity weakens, and what once passed through the body effortlessly now leaves behind metabolic fingerprints that linger in the bloodstream for hours, sometimes days. And this is where eggs become misunderstood, because when prepared correctly, they supply leucine that helps prevent muscle wasting, choline that protects memory centers in the brain, and fat-soluble vitamins that aging bodies struggle to absorb from plant foods alone. Yet when prepared incorrectly, those same eggs can amplify oxidative stress, spike inflammatory markers, and interact dangerously with the modern diet. One of the most well-documented but least discussed problems appears when eggs are eaten alongside refined carbohydrates, a pattern that became normalized over the last 50 years as breakfast shifted from protein-focused meals to white toast, pancakes, sugary cereals, and fruit juice, and research published in metabolic health journals shows that when dietary cholesterol is consumed in the presence of high glycemic carbohydrates, LDL particles are far more likely to oxidize. And oxidized LDL is not just cholesterol. It is a biological signal that tells the immune system to inflame the arterial wall, initiating plaque formation, especially in older adults whose antioxidant defenses are already weakened. In controlled studies, older participants who consumed eggs with refined carbohydrates showed significantly higher post-meal inflammation compared to those who consumed the same eggs with vegetables or healthy fats. Not because eggs were harmful, but because insulin spikes altered how cholesterol was transported and cleared from the bloodstream, turning a nutrient-dense food into metabolic collateral damage. And this matters because post-meal inflammation is now considered one of the strongest predictors of cardiovascular events in seniors, even more predictive than fasting cholesterol levels. Then there is heat. Something rarely discussed in nutrition conversations, but devastating in its effects, because cholesterol itself is not inherently dangerous, but oxidized cholesterol is. And research shows that overcooking eggs, especially at high temperatures, creates cholesterol oxidation products that are directly associated with endothelial dysfunction, the early stage of artery damage. And seniors are uniquely vulnerable here because aging reduces the efficiency of detoxification pathways in the liver, meaning these oxidized compounds stay in circulation longer, silently irritating blood vessels long after the plate is cleared. In laboratory analysis, cholesterol oxidation products formed during high-heat cooking have been shown to accelerate foam cell formation, the very process that turns immune cells into plaque-building agents inside arteries. And while a younger body may clear these compounds quickly, an aging body often cannot, allowing microscopic damage to accumulate meal after meal, year after year, without a single warning sign until blood flow is already compromised. But perhaps the most damaging misunderstanding of all came from the well-intentioned war on dietary fat, when egg yolks were stripped away in the name of heart health, leaving behind only the whites, a move that eliminated not just cholesterol, but choline, vitamin D, vitamin K2, and phospholipids that actually help regulate how cholesterol behaves in the body. And this removal created a nutritional imbalance that research now links to increased appetite, reduced satiety, and paradoxically higher overall caloric intake, a dangerous combination for seniors whose muscle mass is already declining and whose metabolic flexibility is reduced. Choline deficiency, which is shockingly common in adults over 65, has been associated with accelerated cognitive decline, impaired memory formation, and increased homocysteine levels, a blood marker strongly linked to stroke and cardiovascular disease, and egg yolks remain one of the most bioavailable sources of choline in the human diet. Yet decades of fear messaging convinced millions of older adults to discard the very component that made eggs protective in the first place. Cooking oils further complicate the story because eggs themselves are often blamed for inflammation that is actually caused by the unstable fats they are cooked in, as vegetable oils high in omega-6 fatty acids oxidize rapidly under heat, forming aldehydes and lipid peroxides that damage mitochondrial membranes and disrupt cellular signaling. And studies have shown that these compounds elevate inflammatory markers far more aggressively than saturated fats like butter or monounsaturated fats like olive oil. Yet they remain the default choice in many kitchens. For seniors, mitochondrial damage is not a minor issue. It directly impacts energy production, muscle endurance, and even heart rhythm stability. And when eggs are cooked in oxidized oils, the meal becomes a delivery system for compounds that accelerate cellular aging. Again, not because of the egg, but because of the context in which it is consumed. Even eating eggs alone can create problems, not because eggs are incomplete, but because aging digestion relies heavily on fiber and plant compounds to regulate bile acid recycling and cholesterol clearance. And without fiber present in the meal, cholesterol reabsorption increases, especially in older adults whose gut motility has slowed, a phenomenon confirmed in gastrointestinal research examining bile acid metabolism in aging populations. Vegetables, herbs, and polyphenol-rich foods don't just add color to a plate. They activate enzymatic pathways that help shuttle cholesterol out of the body rather than allowing it to recirculate. And when eggs are eaten without these partners, the metabolic load increases, turning what should be nourishment into quiet strain. What makes this story so disturbing is not that eggs were ever harmful, but that millions of seniors were never taught how dramatically context changes biology, and that the same egg can either support muscle retention, brain resilience, and immune strength, or contribute to inflammation, oxidative stress, and vascular damage, depending entirely on preparation, pairing, and cooking method, a reality now supported by decades of nutritional biochemistry and aging research. The real danger was never the egg on the plate. It was the system that removed it from its natural context, stripped away its protective components, paired it with sugar and refined starch, blasted it with unstable oils, and told aging bodies to absorb the consequences in silence. And once you understand this, breakfast is no longer just a meal. It becomes a decision point, one that either aligns with the biology of aging or quietly works against it long before symptoms ever appear. And that is why eggs were never the enemy, but the way we were taught to eat them may have been. For years, millions of people were taught to fear the very center of the egg, told that the golden yolk was a threat, a cholesterol bomb, a silent saboteur of the heart. And nowhere did this fear take deeper root than among older adults who were repeatedly warned that a single yolk could undo decades of healthy living. Yet what most people were never told is that removing the yolk didn't protect the aging body, it quietly deprived it of some of the most critical nutrients required to survive aging itself. As the body grows older, it doesn't just slow down, it becomes less efficient at absorbing nutrients, less capable of synthesizing key compounds on its own, and more vulnerable to deficiencies that don't cause immediate pain but steadily erode strength, memory, and resilience. And this is where the egg yolk becomes not a liability, but a lifeline, because it contains a dense concentration of bioavailable nutrients that aging bodies cannot easily replace from other foods. Choline, one of the most overlooked nutrients in modern nutrition, is found in significant amounts almost exclusively in egg yolks, and it plays a foundational role in building acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter essential for memory, focus, and muscle control. And research has shown that choline intake declines sharply with age, while deficiency is associated with cognitive impairment, increased homocysteine levels, and structural changes in brain tissue. Yet surveys consistently show that the majority of adults over 65 fail to meet even the minimum recommended intake, often because they were told to throw the yolk away. In longitudinal studies, higher choline intake has been associated with better cognitive performance and reduced markers of brain aging. And animal models show that choline deficiency accelerates neurodegenerative processes, particularly in regions responsible for memory formation, meaning that the very nutrient most needed to preserve cognitive independence in later life was systematically removed from breakfast plates in the name of heart health, a recommendation now widely questioned by modern research. The yolk is also one of the rare dietary sources of vitamin D, a hormone-like nutrient essential for immune regulation, calcium balance, and muscle function, and aging skin becomes dramatically less efficient at synthesizing vitamin D from sunlight, sometimes producing up to 75% less than it did in youth, which is why deficiency is so common among seniors and so strongly linked to falls, fractures, weakened immunity, and increased mortality. Yet egg yolks provide a form of vitamin D that is both absorbable and effective, especially when consumed with fat, exactly how nature packaged it. Then there are phospholipids, complex fats found in the yolk that do something few people realize. They help regulate how cholesterol is transported in the bloodstream, and research shows that cholesterol consumed as part of whole eggs behaves differently than cholesterol consumed in isolation, because phospholipids like phosphatidylcholine alter lipoprotein structure, reducing cholesterol absorption and improving HDL function, meaning the yolk doesn't just contain cholesterol, it contains the very compounds that help manage it. This is why controlled feeding studies consistently show that in most individuals, including older adults, whole egg consumption does not significantly increase LDL cholesterol and in many cases improves HDL particle size and function, a far more important marker of cardiovascular protection. Yet public messaging lagged behind the science for decades, leaving fear to replace nuance. Vitamin K2, another nutrient quietly concentrated in egg yolks, plays a crucial role in directing calcium to bones and teeth rather than arteries, and low K2 intake has been associated with increased arterial calcification and cardiovascular risk, particularly in older populations, making its presence in the yolk especially relevant for aging arteries, yet few people even know it exists, let alone that they discarded one of its most accessible food sources. Removing the yolk also alters appetite regulation in ways that are particularly harmful for seniors, because while egg whites provide protein, they lack the fats and micronutrients that signal satiety hormones like peptide YY and cholecystokinin. And studies show that meals lacking these signals lead to increased hunger later in the day, higher snacking behavior, and reduced dietary adherence, a dangerous pattern for older adults trying to maintain stable blood sugar and muscle mass. Muscle loss, known as sarcopenia, accelerates after age 60 and is one of the strongest predictors of frailty, loss of independence, and mortality. And while egg whites contain amino acids, the yolk provides fat-soluble cofactors that support anabolic signaling, allowing the body to actually use that protein efficiently, meaning that separating whites from yolks may reduce the muscle-preserving potential of the meal itself. What makes this story even more unsettling is that cholesterol itself was never the villain it was made out to be, because cholesterol is a structural component of every cell membrane, a precursor to steroid hormones and essential for brain tissue, which is composed largely of cholesterol-rich myelin. And as the brain ages, maintaining membrane integrity becomes increasingly important, yet fear-driven dietary restrictions encouraged older adults to limit cholesterol at the very stage of life when the brain may need it most. Large-scale population studies have repeatedly shown weak or non-existent associations between dietary cholesterol and cardiovascular events in older adults, and some studies even suggest that higher cholesterol levels in advanced age are associated with better survival, a phenomenon that challenges decades of simplistic assumptions and underscores how context, age, and biology radically change nutritional needs. The tragedy is not that guidelines were once cautious, but that they failed to evolve with emerging evidence, leaving generations of seniors convinced that protecting their hearts required sacrificing their brains, their muscles, and their nutrient reserves, when in reality, the yolk was designed as a complete biological package, delivering energy, signaling molecules, vitamins, and fats in a form the human body evolved to recognize and use. When you remove the yolk, you don't just subtract cholesterol, you remove a network of protective compounds that work together. And nutrition science increasingly shows that isolating nutrients breaks the synergy that makes whole foods effective, a mistake repeated across modern diets with devastating long-term consequences. The egg yolk was never excess, never indulgence, never a flaw. It was the core, the control center, the part that nourished life before it ever hatched. And when aging bodies are stripped of that core, deficiencies don't appear overnight. They unfold slowly, invisibly, until memory slips, strength fades, and resilience is lost, often without anyone ever connecting it back to the quiet absence of nutrients that were once dismissed as dangerous. The truth is uncomfortable but clear. The yolk was never the enemy. The fear was, and once that fear is replaced with understanding, the egg transforms from a symbol of risk into one of the most efficient, affordable, and biologically appropriate foods for aging well. Not because it is trendy, but because it was always designed to sustain life at its most vulnerable stages, including the later ones. There is a silent change that happens in the human body after the age of 70, one that doesn't announce itself with pain or symptoms, one that doesn't show up in routine blood work, yet one that quietly determines whether arteries remain flexible or slowly harden from the inside out. And that change is not cholesterol. It is the body's declining ability to clear cholesterol once it enters the bloodstream, a process that depends less on what you avoid eating and far more on what you fail to include. As the digestive system ages, bile production decreases, gut motility slows, and the microbiome shifts in ways that fundamentally alter how fats and cholesterol are processed. And research shows that after age 75, cholesterol reabsorption in the intestines increases significantly, meaning that the same meal that once passed through harmlessly now lingers, recirculates, and quietly contributes to arterial stress, not because the food itself is toxic, but because the system responsible for clearing it has weakened. Fiber is the missing piece in this equation, not the fiber of food labels and marketing claims, but soluble, viscous fiber that binds bile acids in the gut, forcing the liver to pull cholesterol from the bloodstream to make more bile, a mechanism so powerful that it rivals some cholesterol-lowering medications, yet one that is almost entirely absent from the modern senior diet. Clinical studies have repeatedly shown that soluble fiber intake reduces LDL cholesterol, improves endothelial function, and lowers markers of inflammation. But what is rarely discussed is that these effects become more pronounced with age, because older bodies rely more heavily on gut-mediated clearance pathways as liver efficiency declines, making fiber not optional after 75, but essential. Without sufficient fiber, cholesterol is not eliminated. It is recycled, reabsorbed through the intestinal wall, and sent back into circulation, a process known as enterohepatic recirculation. And gastrointestinal research shows that this recycling becomes more aggressive with age, especially in individuals consuming high-protein or high-fat meals without plant-based partners, turning otherwise nutritious foods into long-term burdens. This is why eggs, despite their benefits, can become problematic when eaten alone in older adults, because without fiber present, the cholesterol they contain is more likely to re-enter the bloodstream rather than exit the body, a phenomenon confirmed in studies examining bile acid metabolism in aging populations. Yet the solution was never to remove the eggs. It was to add the missing fiber. Oats, flaxseed, chia seeds, legumes, vegetables, and berries contain soluble fibers that form a gel-like substance in the gut, physically trapping bile acids and cholesterol. And when this gel is present, the body is forced to adapt, pulling cholesterol from arterial circulation to maintain digestion, a natural process that operates quietly, steadily, and without side effects, but only when the diet allows it to function. Flaxseed and chia seeds deserve special attention because they don't just provide soluble fiber, they deliver lignans and omega-3 fatty acids that reduce inflammatory signaling within blood vessels. And studies show that regular intake improves arterial elasticity, a measure directly linked to reduced cardiovascular events in older adults, making these foods uniquely powerful for those over 75. In controlled trials, older participants who added just 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed daily experienced measurable reductions in LDL cholesterol and inflammatory markers within weeks, not months or years, but weeks, a finding that challenges the belief that dietary changes are too late to matter in advanced age, and instead reveals how responsive the aging body still is when given the right inputs. Fiber also feeds beneficial gut bacteria, which produce short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, compounds shown to regulate immune responses, reduce vascular inflammation, and improve insulin sensitivity, all of which deteriorate with age. And research now links low butyrate production to increased arterial stiffness and higher cardiovascular risk in seniors, connecting gut health directly to heart outcomes in a way that was unimaginable just decades ago. What makes this connection so unsettling is that fiber intake drops dramatically after retirement age. As appetite decreases, food variety narrows, and convenience replaces intention. And surveys show that adults over 75 consume less than half the recommended daily fiber intake, creating a perfect storm where cholesterol clearance slows at the exact moment dietary support is most needed. Even more alarming, studies indicate that low fiber intake is associated with increased all-cause mortality in older adults, independent of cholesterol levels, suggesting that fiber's protective effects extend far beyond numbers on a lab report, influencing immune resilience, metabolic stability, and the body's ability to repair itself under stress. Fiber also slows glucose absorption, preventing post-meal blood sugar spikes that damage blood vessels from the inside. And research shows that repeated glucose excursions accelerate endothelial dysfunction more aggressively in older adults than in younger ones, meaning that fiber doesn't just protect arteries from cholesterol, it shields them from sugar-driven damage as well. This is why pairing eggs with fiber-rich foods transforms the metabolic outcome of the meal, shifting it from potential strain to active support because the fiber moderates digestion, regulates lipid transport, and activates clearance pathways that aging bodies increasingly depend on, a synergy supported by nutritional biochemistry, but ignored by decades of reductionist dietary advice. The tragedy is that many seniors were taught to fear fat and cholesterol, but were never taught to fear deficiency, never warned that removing fiber from the plate would quietly dismantle the body's internal cleanup systems, leaving arteries vulnerable not from excess, but from absence. What makes fiber so powerful is not that it acts dramatically, but that it acts consistently. Meal after meal, day after day, performing the unglamorous work of binding, carrying, feeding, and regulating. And in doing so, it restores balance to systems that naturally decline with age, offering protection that no single supplement can replicate. This is not about reversing time or undoing decades of habits. It is about recognizing that after 75, the rules change, and that foods must work together to support aging physiology rather than fight it. And when fiber is restored to its rightful place beside protein and fat, the body responds with a quiet efficiency that feels almost miraculous, yet is entirely grounded in biology. The most dangerous belief is not that eggs are harmful or that cholesterol is deadly, but that it is too late to intervene, because the evidence tells a different story. One where adding fiber can still reduce risk, still improve function, still support life, even in its later chapters, not through force or restriction, but through partnership with the body's remaining strengths. And that is the truth rarely spoken, that after 75, survival is not about elimination. It is about completion, and fiber is the missing partner that allows the entire system to finally work as it was always meant to, quietly protecting the heart while no one is looking.